Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your source material and distill it into the most essential insights.
Today, we're navigating Maryland, a state that's often overlooked, but is just packed with history, incredible economic heft, and some really stunning contrasts.
Right. This sounds less like a single state and more like a collision of four different American regions. You've got Appalachian Mountains, Tidewater traditions, its history as a Catholic haven, and then Washington, D.C.'s enormous federal gravity pulling on everything.
It truly is. It's a state that's really defined by its position at the crossroads of American identity. It's mid-Atlantic, it's northeastern, and it's southern all at once,
Right.
and all squeezed into this, remarkably small footprint.
So our mission is to provide you with a comprehensive understanding of this really complex state. We've got an exhaustive look at Maryland from its controversial colonial founding as a Catholic haven through its strategic and, let's be honest, sometimes authoritarian role in the Civil War. Right up to its modern status as this wealthy, highly diverse, and technologically advanced hub wedged directly into the Washington, D.C. orbit.
So we really need to unpack precisely why Maryland has earned that enduring moniker, America in miniature. And, maybe most critically, connect its unique, often messy history, all that religious tension and the border conflicts, to its present-day demographic and economic dominance.
And that D.C. proximity, it isn't just a geographical quirk, is it? It's the ultimate economic and cultural engine defining the modern state.
It's everything.
And as we explore the deeper layers of this history and geography, we're going to hit some truly surprising facts that, they really define the state's eccentric identity.
Oh, absolutely.
We'll look at why a state with over 4,000 miles of tidal shoreline has no natural lakes.
Which is just bizarre when you think about it.
Right. And the fascinating, almost medieval origins of why the justices on Maryland's Supreme Court wear bright red robes and why the official state sport is, of all things, jousting.
A lot of history and geography to cover, all compressed into a relatively small space. Maryland is the 9th smallest state by land area, comparable in overall size to Belgium.
Wow.
But what it lacks in size, it really makes up for in density, complexity, and just sheer cultural dynamism.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
And let's start at the beginning. The conflicting, messy identities that were laid down during its earliest years.
Sounds good.
So Maryland was one of the original 13 colonies, but its founding vision was radically different from its Puritan neighbors to the north and the more commercial colonies to the south.
Completely different.
It was granted a charter in 1632 to Cecilius Calvert, the second Baron, Baltimore. He was succeeding his father, George Calvert, who had initially sought the charter from King Charles I.
And the intention here was, it was profound. It was to provide a religious haven for Catholics who were being harshly persecuted in Protestant England. This wasn't just about making money. It was a grand social and religious experiment.
And the name itself.
The king officially named the colony Terra Marie, or Maryland, in honor of his Catholic wife, Henrietta Maria of France. Lord Baltimore had initially suggested Crescentia, which means the land of growth or increase.
But the name honoring the Queen stuck.
It did.
The first colonial settlement and capital, St. Mary's City, was established with what sounds like unusual peacefulness. It was purchased from the paramount chief of the region in March 1634. You'd think this was an idyllic beginning for a colony founded on religious tolerance.
You would think. But that idyllic beginning, that noble vision, it immediately ran into the cold, hard reality of migration patterns.
How so?
Well, even though Maryland was intended as a Catholic haven, and to be fair, it was the most heavily Catholic of the English colonies, Catholics were always a minority.
Always.
A consistent minority, yeah. Often less than 10% of the total population. The vast majority of the early migrants were Protestant indentured servants. They were coming for land and opportunity, not necessarily for religious refuge.
And that demographic imbalance, that had to have set the stage for some major internal conflicts, right? Especially with politics shifting back in England.
It was a powder keg, and the major flashpoint was a period known as the plundering time, from 1644 to 1646. It demonstrates this volatility perfectly.
The plundering time. So what happened?
Puritans, many of whom had migrated from neighboring, more established Virginia, founded their own settlements like Providence, which is now Annapolis, and they just seized control of the government.
So this was more than a political change.
Oh, it was a religious coup. Puritan associates, men like William Claiborne and Richard Ingle, used the rhetoric of religious purity to get popular support, and they effectively nullified the Catholic authority of the Calverts.
And they didn't just, overturn laws.
No, no. They imprisoned Jesuit priests, they confiscated their property, and they often shipped them back to England in chains. The violence and chaos were so severe that it took 2 full years for the proprietary government to regain any kind of control.
Wow. So when that government was briefly restored in 1646, they must have tried to stabilize things.
They did. They tried a political compromise. They passed the Act Concerning Religion in 1649, which famously granted religious liberty.
But there was a catch, I assume.
A huge catch. It only applied to Trinitarian Christians. This excluded Jews, Unitarians, anyone outside that very specific definition. So tolerance had very clear limits, even in the haven.
And that peace didn't last long either.
Not at all. By 1650, the Protestants revolted again. The new Puritan government didn't just throw out the 1649 Act. They took the extreme step of outlawing both Catholicism and Anglicanism.
They outlawed both.
Both. There are records of mobs literally burning down the original Catholic churches built in southern Maryland. The key insight here is that the founding of Maryland established this really early, really messy precedent for religious tolerance debates in North America. And it was always shaped by the powerful, often intolerant politics of England.
And this persecution got even worse later on, didn't it? After England's own political shift, the Glorious Revolution of 1688.
Exactly. After 1688, Maryland officially outlawed Catholicism for a second, much more lasting time. You see these repressive laws passed in 1704 that just crushed the Catholic community's ability to even exist openly.
What kind of laws?
They couldn't operate schools. The corporate ownership of property by religious orders was severely limited. It forced wealthy Catholic planters to build secret chapels inside their own homes, practicing their faith in, relative secrecy and isolation for decades.
That history of just profound religious strife and intolerance, it stands in such stark contrast to the colony's initial mission.
It really does. It just demonstrates how incredibly vulnerable colonial identity and governance were to political and religious shifts happening thousands of miles away. It hardened Maryland's internal conflicts long before the Revolution even started.
Speaking of conflict, Maryland didn't just fight its neighbors over religion. It also spent nearly a century arguing over its literal borders, especially with Pennsylvania.
That's absolutely right. Part of what makes Maryland a border state is the fact that its precise location was determined by, royal confusion and actual gunfire.
And this all centers on a huge geographical error involving the 40th parallel.
A colossal error. It defined the border disputes between 1681 and 1760. Maryland's charter granted land up to the 40th parallel. The problem was Pennsylvania's charter, granted to William Penn, also set its southern border at that very same 40th parallel.
How does that even happen?
King Charles II and William Penn mistakenly assumed the parallel would pass close to Newcastle, Delaware, which was a convenient point for establishing a border.
Oh, that doesn't.
Not even close. The 40th parallel actually falls north of Philadelphia. So this astronomical error meant the charters just fundamentally overlap, giving the Calvert family of Maryland and the Penn family of Pennsylvania competing claims to thousands of square miles of very productive land.
And this wasn't settled politely in court.
No, this escalated into armed conflict. It was known as Creosops War in the 1730s. The sources detail actual military deployments by both Maryland and Pennsylvania forces in 1736 and 1737. There was real bloodshed, skirmishes over settlements along that contested boundary.
So you needed royal intervention just to stop neighbors from shooting each other over an invisible line that a king misplaced.
Pretty much. It took King George II intervening in 1738 just to compel a ceasefire. The sheer violence of this colonial border dispute just highlights the intensity of land claims in early America.
And the final resolution.
It was a massive undertaking, finally signed in 1760. This led to the commissioning of Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon to survey and mark the boundary.
The Mason-Dixon line.
The very same. And that line did more than just settle a land dispute. It became the iconic cultural boundary between the North and the South in the decades that followed.
So that same precision was applied to Delaware's border, too.
Yes, Maryland's border with Delaware was based on the Transpeninsular Line and the 12-mile circle around Newcastle. It was a testament to the rigorous, conflict-driven surveying that was required to finally nail down these proprietary land claims.
So this process really solidified Maryland's status as a strategically and geographically defined border state.
Exactly.
Moving into the 18th and 19th centuries, Maryland's labor systems also cemented that identity, especially regarding its very complex relationship with slavery.
Very complex.
Most early English colonists arrived as indentured servants, right? Trading years of labor for passage.
Yes, and in those very early years, the line between these indentured servants and African slaves was surprisingly fluid. Sometimes it blurred. They often lived, worked, and even formed unions together.
But that changed.
It changed dramatically. As the flow of white indentured workers dried up because economic conditions back in England were improving, planters shifted heavily toward importing thousands more enslaved Africans.
And as the economy grew dependent on cash crops, the racial caste system just hardened rapidly.
It did. And a key legal distinction was made early on. Children born to white mothers were considered free, following the principle of partus sequitur ventrum. This was designed to protect white property rights, but it had the unintended consequence of creating a large established population of free African Americans within the state.
So this combination of a long history of slavery existing right alongside of massive free black population makes Maryland uniquely contradictory.
It's the central contradiction, and despite being a slave state, it became a critical incubator for the abolitionist movement. Two giants of that movement, Harriet Tubman,
Born in Dorchester County,
and Frederick Douglass, born in Talbot County. They both hailed from Maryland's eastern shore. This is a crucial historical paradox. The state that held them captive also gave birth to their eventual fight for freedom.
it also has an important constitutional footnote. Maryland was one of the 13 colonies to revolt against the British, but it was the last state, the 13th, to approve the ratification of the Articles of Confederation in 1781.
And that delay wasn't arbitrary. It reflected these deep internal political divisions and disagreements over land claims, particularly Western territories. It really shows the state's cautious approach to national commitment, even during the Revolution.
And then finally, that strategic border location was permanently etched into the national landscape in 1790.
Right, when Maryland donated land from Montgomery and Prince George's counties to create Washington, D.C.
Virginia also contributed land, but that was eventually returned in 1846.
Maryland's donation stuck. And that decision forever tied the state's political, economic, and demographic destiny to the federal capital.
Which means Maryland walked into the 19th century already geographically pinched, internally divided by religion, and economically cleaved by the institution of slavery existing right next door to the emerging federal government.
An incredibly complex position to be in.
And that position led to some major defining moments in the 19th century, starting with the War of 1812.
Yes, when the British military attempted to capture Baltimore, the defense of Fort McHenry inspired Francis Scott Key, who was witnessing the bombardment, to write the Star-Spangled Banner.
That successful defense cemented Baltimore's role not just as a major port, but as a symbol of national resilience. But Maryland was also an infrastructure pioneer, which really dictated its future economic path.
It was. In 1817, the National Road, which later became U.S. Route 40, was authorized. It ran from Baltimore all the way west to St. Louis, making Baltimore the primary eastern terminus for western expansion.
But the real game changer was the railroad.
The railroad created the state's first true economic moat. The Baltimore and Ohio, the B&O Railroad, chartered in 1827, was the first chartered railroad in the United States designed for commercial traffic. It was meant to compete with New York's Erie Canal.
Its first section opened in 1830.
Baltimore to Ellicott City, and by 1852 it was the first rail line to successfully reach the Ohio River from the eastern seaboard.
This industrial growth and infrastructure dominance set an incredibly complex scene for the Civil War. Maryland was a slave state, but due to demographics and some pretty heavy-handed federal intervention, it stayed in the Union.
This is the ultimate crossroads identity. If you look at the 1860 census, nearly half, 49% of Maryland's African Americans were already free. That's a massive statistical difference compared to states in the Deep South.
And that large established free population provided a powerful internal ballast against secession, even among slave owners.
It did, but preserving this strategically critical border state for the Union still required some very controversial intervention by President Lincoln.
Wait a minute. For a state that fought a century for religious tolerance and whose citizens were about to fight a war based on freedom, the fact that its loyalty had to be forced by suspending civil liberties, that's a huge stain on its eventual free state identity. How do historians square that necessary authoritarianism?
That's an essential contradiction. Lincoln clearly understood that Maryland's proximity to Washington, D.C., it nearly surrounded the capital, made its loyalty non-negotiable.
So what did he do?
To ensure control, he had prominent pro-slavery politicians and newspaper editors arrested, including the mayor of Baltimore. And he suspended the writ of habeas corpus, allowing indefinite detention without trial.
And he placed artillery on Federal Hill, overlooking Baltimore. A very clear signal.
It was a signal that the federal government was determined to maintain control, using military threat to suppress political dissent. It demonstrates that Maryland's loyalty was, pragmatic and coerced, not purely ideological.
And the conflict started early there.
Very early. The Baltimore riot of April 1861, when federal units were attacked while marching through the city, was the very first bloodshed of the Civil War.
And later, the Battle of Antietam.
September 1862, near Sharpsburg. The bloodiest single-day battle in American history. While it was technically a tactical draw, it was a massive strategic victory for the Union. It repelled the Confederate invasion of the North and gave Lincoln the political momentum he needed to issue the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation.
After the war, the new state constitution in 1864 officially abolished slavery in Maryland. And the sources confirm that this is where the state was first recognized as a free state, signifying freedom from human bondage.
It is a very powerful, resonant origin for the nickname, but the fight for voting rights and political power didn't end with abolition. After Reconstruction ended in 1877, the Democratic Party, which controlled the state, employed every means possible to disenfranchise black voters.
Intimidation, fraud, new laws.
All of it. But this resistance is a critical part of Maryland's character. Black voters, along with newly arrived European immigrants, actively resisted. They formed a powerful, biracial Republican coalition.
And they successfully defeated 3 key disenfranchisement bills in 1905, 1907, and 1911.
They did. The fact that black voters made up 20% of the electorate then, combined with high literacy rates among black residents and the power of immigrant votes, was enough to maintain suffrage and resist the wave of Jim Crow laws that swept the South.
A crucial distinction from its southern neighbors.
A very crucial distinction. Meanwhile, the Industrial Revolution fueled a massive economic and demographic boom. Baltimore's seaport and rail connections attracted enormous waves of European immigrants, Jewish, Italian, Greek, Polish, Russian, Ukrainian communities.
And this is when philanthropy created Maryland's deep institutional structure.
Exactly. Wealthy businessmen like Johns Hopkins, Enoch Pratt, and Henry Walters funneled their industrial fortunes into creating these enduring cultural institutions that still bear their names today.
Johns Hopkins University, the Enoch Pratt Free Library, the Walters Art Museum.
And those institutions, founded on industrial wealth, later became the bedrock of Maryland's transition into a high-tech medical and research center.
Now, we have to address the confusing evolution of the Free State nickname. Its powerful origin was the abolition of slavery in 1864, but its modern popular usage, the one you hear most often today, was coined later and meant something entirely different.
That's right. The term was popularized by H.L. Mencken, the famed satirist and columnist for the Baltimore Sun, after an editor named Hamilton Owens coined it in 1923.
And the context was surprising.
Very. They were celebrating Maryland for failing to pass prohibition laws. It was a jab at the perceived puritanism of the rest of the nation. So the meaning transitioned from freedom from slavery to freedom from government meddling.
Highlighting a state proud of its historical nonconformity.
Precisely.
The 20th century saw Baltimore central to wartime production, especially during World War II. But after the war, the economic and cultural focus shifted dramatically.
It did. Rapid population growth led to massive suburban development, particularly around the Washington, D.C. Baltimore corridor. You see planned communities like Columbia and Montgomery Village emerge.
And this suburbanization fundamentally shifted the state's culture and political power base away from its traditional Southern and Tidewater identity.
It shifted it toward a new mid-Atlantic, high-tech service economy orientation. That geographic transformation was literally bridged in 1952 with the opening of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, which linked the isolated eastern and western shores.
And at the same time, heavy manufacturing in Baltimore declined sharply.
As did traditional jobs like coal mining in western Maryland. The state attempted urban renewal projects in Baltimore to counter depopulation, but the gravitational pull of the D.C. orbit was already starting to reshape everything.
That rapid suburban growth and economic shift happened across Maryland's spectacularly varied physical landscape. which is probably the perfect time to map out why this tiny state earned the nickname America in miniature.
Let's do it.
Maryland is the ninth smallest state by land area, comparable to Belgium, yet its physical diversity is just stunning. It really contains a microcosm of America's East Coast geography.
It really does. You can identify 5 distinct geographic regions. You move from the sandy dunes and low marshlands on the eastern shore, a classic coastal plain,
Right.
through the flat, tobacco history lands of southern Maryland, across the rolling Piedmont hills of the central counties, into the dense urbanization of the Baltimore-Washington corridor, and finally into the heavily forested Appalachian Mountains in the far west.
And the most dominant physical feature, the state's ecological and economic heart, is the Chesapeake Bay. It nearly bisects the state.
16 of the 23 counties, plus Baltimore City, border its tidal waters. That's over 4,000 miles of shoreline. The bay dictates everything: climate, culture, cuisine, commerce, everything.
The sheer narrowness of the state in the Appalachian region is another geographic quirk that's worth noting.
It is. Near the town of Hancock in western Maryland, less than 2 miles separate the northern border, the Mason-Dixon line, from the southern border, the Potomac River.
Less than 2 miles.
Yeah. This compressed geography means you can drive from the mid-Atlantic into the mountains of Appalachia in less than an hour. The highest point in the state, Hoya Crest on Backbone Mountain, reaches 3,360 feet.
And while most of the state's waterways drain into the Chesapeake, there are a few important exceptions.
Right. A tiny western portion of Garrett County drains into the Mississippi River watershed via the Uruguay River, heading toward the Gulf of Mexico.
And on the other side.
The eastern part of Worcester County drains into Atlantic coastal bays, and a small northeast corner drains into the Delaware River watershed.
Okay, and here's that promised geological surprise that I still find counterintuitive.
Hmm?
Despite all that coastline and all that water,
Yeah.
Maryland has no natural lakes.
None. Zero. All existing lakes, including the large recreational Deep Creek Lake in the west, were constructed using dams. This is primarily because the area lacks the glacial history that's necessary to carve out large permanent natural basins. The water just tends to move quickly out to the bay or the ocean.
That makes the sheer volume of water flowing into the Chesapeake Bay from the entire watershed, which extends far beyond Maryland, even more significant. It explains why pollution management for the Bay is a multi-state federal issue, not just a Maryland one.
Absolutely. And the state's diverse ecology is supported by adequate precipitation, about 35 to 45 inches annually. This allows for incredible forest diversity. You have Middle Atlantic coastal forests, southeastern mixed forests, and Appalachian Blue Ridge forests.
And many of the state's official symbols are drawn directly from this rich natural environment. The state tree is the white oak.
A magnificent species. And the state flower, the bright yellow black-eyed Susan, grows in abundance everywhere. It just signals summer.
The fauna is equally iconic. The state bird, the Baltimore Oriole.
The mascot of the MLB team. The state crustacean is the blue crab, which is the largest commercial catch from the bay. And the University of Maryland's mascot, the diamondback terrapin, is the state reptile.
There's even a state insect, the Baltimore checker spot butterfly.
Though its populations are unfortunately struggling at the southern edge of its range.
And then you have animals that speak to the state's specific geographic and historical context, like the Chesapeake Bay Retriever.
Right, a purebred dog developed in the area specifically for water sports and hunting in the often frigid, rough waters of the bay.
And, of course, one of the most famous animal populations in the country, the feral Chincoteague ponies on Assateague Island.
They're famously believed to be descended from Spanish galleon shipwrecks. They're managed through that annual capture and swim to Chincoteague, Virginia for sale, all popularized by the children's book Misty of Chincoteague. It's a perfect example of folklore meeting natural history.
The climate also varies wildly, supporting that America in miniature idea. The eastern half, the coastal plain, has a humid subtropical climate. Hot, humid summers, cool winters.
But drive just 2 hours west into the Appalachian area of Allegheny and Garrett counties, and you quickly transition into a humid continental climate. The mountains trap moisture, leading to over 100 inches of annual snowfall in some areas. That is a huge climatic spread for such a small state.
And regarding natural hazards.
The state is vulnerable to tropical cyclones, though it's somewhat buffered by the Delmarva Peninsula and the Outer Banks. It averages about 6 tornado strikes and 30 to 40 thunderstorms a year.
Crucially, the state has also taken notable policy action to protect this diverse environment.
It has, placing it high in national rankings. Forbes.com rated Maryland the fifth greenest state back in 2007, and Maryland joined the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, to work with northeastern states to reduce emissions.
And what's remarkable is the political commitment to moving away from fossil fuels. In 2017, Maryland became the first state with proven gas reserves to ban fracking by law.
And by announcing the retirement of the Warrior Run coal plant, the state is on track to be coal-free by 2025. That is a significant and expensive commitment to green initiatives.
And it goes hand in hand with the massive ongoing efforts to improve the health of the Chesapeake Bay from pollution caused by fertilizer runoff and livestock waste.
This dual focus, protecting the vast natural resources of the bay while pivoting sharply away from traditional extractive industries, is a hallmark of the modern Maryland identity. But that identity is even more clearly defined by the enormous gravity of the federal government.
This is where the story gets really compelling, because the traditional idea of Maryland as a simple border state has been dramatically overtaken by its modern reality. Unparalleled wealth and incredible global diversity fueled by that D.C. orbit.
Let's just look at the economic facts. They demonstrate a unique economic moat. Maryland has consistently ranked at or near the top of the nation for median household income. It was the highest in 2015 and ranked third as of 2023. This is not accidental wealth, it's structural.
Right. The state also boasts the lowest poverty rate at 7.8% and the most millionaires per capita.
And you can see that concentration of wealth immediately in the D.C. suburbs. Two counties, Howard and Montgomery, rank as the 2nd and 11th wealthiest counties in the entire nation. This density of affluence is directly linked to the stability and high salary levels of federal and federal contracting jobs.
The gross state product was over $380 billion in 2016. But here's a key insight. Maryland uses the Genuine Progress Indicator, or GPI, to guide its development, not just GDP.
And that GPI focus is critical. It moves beyond mere economic output to factor in quality of life, like the monetary value of leisure time, the cost of pollution and traffic congestion, and the negative impacts of income inequality.
So it's a governance philosophy that values sustainability and public health, which requires a large public tax base to support.
Exactly. And that wealth is inseparable from the massive demographic shift that's occurring. Maryland is one of only 9 states where non-whites compose a majority of the population, 50.2% non-white Hispanic as of 2019. This gives it the highest percentage of non-white residents on the entire East Coast.
So let's break down that multiculturalism. African Americans comprise a substantial 31.1% of the population.
And this is a major political and economic success story. Prince George's and Charles counties are statistically the 2 counties where African Americans are the most monetarily successful in the entire country.
Prince George's in particular has been a magnet for African Americans moving out of D.C. due to gentrification, often referred to colloquially as Ward 9 of D.C.
Right, but the truly staggering demographic change comes from global migration. Maryland has, by far, the highest percentage of residents born in Africa out of any state. It's a massive and ongoing inflow of skilled professionals drawn by the D.C. and Baltimore economic hubs.
What are the top groups?
You see large communities of Nigerians, often from the Igbo and Yoruba ethnic groups, and perhaps most notably, the Washington metro area, including the Maryland suburbs, has the world's largest population of Ethiopians outside of Ethiopia. You also find large, growing communities of Cameroonians, Ghanaians, and Sierra Leoneans.
And we see a similar phenomenon with Hispanic and Latino communities. Maryland has the highest percentage of residents of Central American origin of any state.
Salvadorans are the single largest Hispanic group, a consequence of decades of immigration driven by political instability in Central America. The D.C. area has the 2nd highest total number of Salvadorans after Los Angeles.
And other groups?
Other major Hispanic groups include Mexicans, Guatemalans, and Hondurans. The state's Hispanic population is noted for being incredibly diverse.
Asia contributes significantly as well. Asian American communities are concentrated in those high-income D.C. and Baltimore suburbs, especially Howard and Montgomery counties. Indian Americans are the largest Asian group,
followed by Chinese Americans, who are the largest Asian group in Montgomery County. And if you drive through Howard County, the scale of the Korean American community is evident, particularly in the Koreatown located in Ellicott City.
Maryland also hosts one of the largest populations of Nepali Americans. This demographic explosion has fundamentally transformed the cultural landscape from, tidewater to truly global.
It's a complete transformation.
So let's circle back to that history of religious strife. Despite its origin as a Catholic haven, Modern religious life looks very different.
It does. Current data shows Protestants are the largest religious group at 52%, Catholicism is a distant second at 15%, and the religiously unaffiliated are now a massive 23%, climbing to nearly 28% in 2020.
Despite the lower percentage today, the state remains historically critical for Catholics. Baltimore was the seat of the first U.S. Catholic bishop in 1789.
And home to the first Catholic cathedral, the Basilica of the Assumption. The institutional presence remains immense, even if the percentage of adherents has fallen.
Outside of Christianity, Judaism is the largest non-Christian religion.
About 3 to 4% of the population, over 240,000 adherents. There are significant concentrations in Montgomery County and in communities like Pikesville and Owings Mills near Baltimore.
And finally, Maryland also stands out as a leader in LGBT rights. It has the highest percentage of LGBT people in its populace of any state, second only to D.C. itself.
And it ranks among the best for LGBT rights. It legalized same-sex marriage in 2013 after voters upheld the Question 6 referendum, demonstrating its modern, progressive bent.
And here's a powerful historical connection that ties back to that theme of freedom. The first person known to describe himself as a drag queen, William Dorsey Swann, was born enslaved in Hancock, Maryland.
Swann later became the first American on record who pursued legal and political action to defend the LGBTQ community's right to assemble in the late 19th century. That long thread of fighting for freedom runs deep.
All of this, the history, geography, the people, it all feeds into the massive economic and political engine of the state, which is fueled almost entirely by that federal grab.
It's all connected.
So let's talk about that economic engine. Maryland's economy is just inextricably linked to Washington, D.C.
That proximity translates directly into wealth and specialized industry. It creates what economists call an economic moat. Maryland is a major hub for defense, aerospace, and bioresearch.
Right. Fort Meade, for example, headquarters, the Defense Information Systems Agency, U.S. Cyber Command, and the National Security Agency.
This concentration of intelligence and cyber operations has made Maryland a global leader in cybersecurity, drawing specialized contractors and creating a stable demand for cleared, high-salary positions. It insulates the state from many national economic downturns.
And the biotech and health sector is equally massive. Maryland is the fourth largest nexus for life sciences research and development in the country.
The largest single employer in the Baltimore area is Johns Hopkins University and its Applied Physics Laboratory, which does highly sensitive R&D for the military and NASA.
Then you factor in the massive federal agencies just over the D.C. border, the NIH in Bethesda, the FDA in Silver Spring, the National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Even defense contractors like Emergent Biosolutions, which manufactures an anthrax vaccine for the U.S. military, are based there. This guarantees not just jobs, but highly educated, high-income stability.
And this high-tech shift explains why traditional manufacturing, like the Sparrows Point Steel Factory, has so completely declined.
It's been replaced by diversified manufacturing like electronics and computer equipment. Traditional mining is virtually gone.
But traditional trade remains vital, centered on the Port of Baltimore.
It ranks 17th in the U.S. by tonnage, handling huge bulk commodities. But critically, the Port of Baltimore is the #1 auto port in the U.S. for imported motor vehicles.
And much of its efficiency is due to the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal.
A 14-mile shortcut that carries 40% of the port's ship traffic, directly connecting the Chesapeake Bay to the Delaware River.
Commercial fishing is also a significant part of the food production sector. Blue crab, oysters, striped bass.
All deeply tied to the state's cultural identity and economy. Agriculture, while constantly threatened by urbanization, is still strong. Dairy, specialty horticulture.
But the old cash crops have faded. Tobacco farming is nearly gone, bought out by a state program in the 1990s.
Right. Southeastern Maryland, however, still has massive, highly automated poultry farming operations. Salisbury is home to Purdue Farms.
Yet, agriculture faces these new, modern challenges.
It does. It's battling an unusual threat, a multiply-resistant ragweed. This weed has triple resistance to 3 major classes of widely used herbicides.
A profound threat, especially for a key crop like soybeans. The source notes this is the state's worst multi-resistant weed problem.
It's a huge problem,
Yep.
and it forces the state to invest its high-tech R&D resources, currently focused on defense, into sustainable agricultural solutions.
Managing this high-density population and infrastructure requires a highly integrated transportation network.
Absolutely. And Maryland has 110 miles of I-95, the critical north-south artery on the East Coast. And then there are the beltways, the Baltimore Beltway and the Capital Beltway.
And there are some interstate quirks. I-97 is the shortest one- or two-digit interstate in the contiguous U.S.
And I-595 is the longest unsigned interstate. Rail is also robust, capitalizing on that historic B&O infrastructure. Amtrak serves the Northeast Corridor, and the state runs the critical MREC commuter rail system.
which serves thousands of federal and high-tech commuters daily.
Exactly. And don't forget the airports. BWI is the largest, but historically you have to mention the College Park Airport, founded in 1909, the nation's oldest continuously operating airport.
Where Wilbur Wright trained military aviators, just an enduring role in American innovation.
Which brings us to how this complex state is actually governed.
Right. The state government operates from Annapolis. The governor has unique, significant authority in budgeting, giving the executive branch greater control over fiscal policy.
And the judicial system has that fascinating visual quirk. The State Supreme Court of Maryland is the only state Supreme Court whose justices wear red robes.
A tradition dating back to colonial times and English judicial dress, civilizing the blood of the martyrs, a nod back to that long history of Catholic strife.
It is. It's a visually unique tradition that immediately separates them from every other state.
And when it comes to financing this complex state, the taxation system is necessarily high. The combined state and local piggyback income tax rate can be up to 9.45%.
Which is the fifth highest in the country. This high-tax environment isn't accidental. It's the cost of maintaining the nation's highest educational spending and supporting a massive public infrastructure.
Politically, the state is defined by its great urban-rural divide. Elections are dominated by Baltimore City and the four surrounding suburban counties.
This Baltimore-Washington axis holds large, consistent Democratic voting blocs. So the Republican-leaning western and eastern shores, while often winning geographically, are typically overcome by the density and sheer population weight of the corridor.
And the state recently saw a political landmark reflecting this powerful demographic reality. Wes Moore, elected in 2022, is the first African-American governor of Maryland.
And only the fifth in American history. That high tax structure directly funds Maryland's commitment to educational excellence. Education Week ranked Maryland #1 in its Quality Counts reports from 2009 to 2013.
The state also leads the country in academic achievement metrics, like the percentage of students passing advanced placement exams.
And that K-12 excellence feeds directly into its unparalleled higher education system. Johns Hopkins University is a global powerhouse.
And the public system is anchored by the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and the flagship research institution, the University of Maryland, College Park.
Plus, you have Morgan State University, a historically black college, and historic private institutions like St. John's College and Washington College, which are among the oldest in the country.
Finally, we have to hit those unique official state symbols that encapsulate the state's incredibly diverse culture.
Maryland has a vibrant pro sports culture, the Ravens, the Orioles, and claims legends like Babe Ruth and Cal Ripken Jr., but the official designations are truly idiosyncratic.
My favorite is still the official state sport, designated in 1962, jousting.
It speaks directly to the colonial era, where jousting tournaments were a popular pastime for the wealthy gentry, a medieval contest living on in modern governance.
And the official team sport, adopted in 2004, is lacrosse.
Reflecting the sport's deep roots and indigenous origins in the region, the fact that the official sport is medieval jousting and the official exercise is walking perfectly captures the state's dual nature.
And yes, the official state exercise, designated in 2008, is walking. Maryland was the first state to adopt one. And after all that walking, you can enjoy the official state food, the Smith Island cake.
Historic attractions like Baltimore's Harbor Place, Ocean City, Annapolis, and St. Mary's all solidify its appeal as a diverse tourist destination.
So what does this all mean? From contested history of fragile religious freedom and political coercion to the intense economic pressures of being the wealthiest and most diverse Mid-Atlantic corridor, Maryland truly is a complex tapestry.
It raises an important question about how historical regional identities, Southern, Tidewater, Appalachian, can persist and blend, even as massive demographic shifts, driven by federal proximity and global migration, rapidly transform the landscape. Maryland is constantly redefining itself.
That dynamic tension between the D.C. economic engine and the state's deep, complicated history is what makes it so endlessly fascinating.
That internal conflict also leaves us with a provocative environmental puzzle. Maryland has banned fracking, it's on track to be coal-free, it ranks high for green initiatives,
What?
yet its agriculture sector is dealing with the worst multi-resistant weed problem in the state, that triple-resistant ragweed threatening large-scale soybean cultivation.
How effectively can a state dedicated to green initiatives combat threats, not just from industrial pollution, but from biological challenges like resistant invasive species, which are potentially exacerbated by a changing climate?
It's a subtle but profound threat that requires Maryland to pivot its high-tech R&D, currently focused on defense and intelligence towards sustainable agriculture and biological security. Something to mull over as you contemplate the delicate balance required to maintain the prosperity of America in miniature.
Absolutely. The next layer of the deep dive is always waiting. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.